Simone. I am excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be having a very special episode where we are going to be giving you, Basecamp listeners, access to exclusive data that no one else has seen. And you know why? Because one of you put it together.
Oh.
Yes. So anyway, I was talking with this fan, and he is saying, anecdotally, as a Mormon, so obviously he has a lot of insight into what the Mormons are doing, the fertility rate among the Mormon community. He goes, it seems to me that the most religious of Mormons are having two big issues. One is they are going woke much faster than other Mormons. Like the individuals within their community seem to go woke at a higher rate than other communities. He noted this mostly happens when they deconvert, but this is still a problem because their kids will be going to the same schools, which can become a drain on the community overall. And two is they just seem to be being hit by fertility collapse much harder than just generically religious Mormons. And I was like, that's a really interesting observation. Would you mind trying a study on that? And he actually went on and did a study, and a big one. He got 310 people involved in this.
Would you like to know more?
And so he found out that his hypothesis was borne out in the data, and it gives us one of the keys for a new theory at solving fertility collapse that I have been building.
Oh, yummy. I'm excited for this.
I'm quoting him right now in an email where he sent the data to me. I took it upon myself to do a study on age, religiosity, and fertility among members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Everyone in the study has strong ties to the state of Utah and still maintains some relationship. For some, it may be very complicated with Mormons as a cultural group. This is based on a random sampling of 310 people I found on Facebook for the study. They are divided into 6 groups. Groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, with 1 being least religious and 6 being most religious. Findings were stark. Among those aged 65 plus, the correlation between religiosity and fertility was 0.45. They had an average fertility of a whopping 4.53. So 65 and older for this almost had a 4.5 average fertility rate. That's fantastic, Mormon.
Wow.
But that's also what we would expect. Remember, Mormons used to have unusually high fertility rates.
Yeah.
For those aged 64 and younger, the fertility rates dropped dramatically. Among those 35 to 64, the correlation between religiosity and fertility rate was 0.16. So note, it dropped to a rather low level. It dropped from 0.45 to 0.16 in this next generation. And I'm going to, I think what's really happening here and why this hasn't been picked up in data yet is I think that this is a new phenomenon where in some religious traditions within the modern post-cell phone generation, fertility rates drop as religiosity enters extreme ranges. But we'll talk more about the data here. I'm going back to the quote. What appears to be the case is that among the strongly religious, they started having kids less, but among those less religious, they still had cultural reasons to have kids. 35 to 64 age cohort had a fertility rate of 2.92. Among those aged 25 to 34, the correlation between religiosity and fertility was 0.32. So much stronger than the 35 to 64 group, but not as high as the 65 plus age group. They currently have a fertility rate of 1.1, but I expect this group to eventually have 0.9 more children on average. So it'll round out to about 2, barely below replacement rate.
So wait, you meant 2.1 then?
What did
you just said 1.1 earlier.
No, they have a current fertility rate of 1.1, but he expects them to have an additional 0.9 kids as they age.
Oh, sorry, of this sample. Okay, yeah, sorry. Okay, now I'm following.
By the way, I don't cut out when you misunderstand something because other people have pointed out in the comments, they're like, if Simone has misunderstood something, more than half your audience.
Not everyone is as sleep deprived as Simone, so that's maybe not, but yeah.
Well, then honestly, you should be going to bed earlier and putting the kids to bed earlier because they're really tired when I wake them up, which to me implies that they're not going down.
They're refusing to go to bed.
Simone, if you get them in the room alone earlier, they'll go to bed early.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, this is our parenting negotiation here.
What?
This is you being a bad husband, just being too like, you have to get more sleep, wife. I demand it. No choice do you have in the matter. Okay. Previously, I thought these trends would only appear for those born post-1980, but the data clearly shows them emerging for those born post 1960. So the internet was not the major factor here. Oh, I was wrong. Yeah. Okay. I would say it may deal more with economic factors, but I'm not entirely sure. Furthermore, I acknowledge the largest limitation to the study is mere subjectively rating people 1 to 6, but I feel like it's not too different than doing the same thing with people on the Jewish spectrum by analyzing clothing, style, aesthetics, activities, language, etc. I also
Sure.
acknowledge that my Facebook may be a slightly higher fertility sample than average, but I'm unsure about this. This is where it gets interesting. For the 64 plus age group, the fertility rate for those most religious, 6 rating, their fertility rate was 5.4. Most of the other religious groups hovered around 4. So boomers and the silent generation Mormons usually had around 4-ish kids on average. Obviously, some as high as 7 in sizable numbers, and some were as low as 2 in sizable numbers. However, for the 35 to 64 age group, the most religious, the 6 rating, the fertility rate collapsed to 3.21. But the group that was rated as 4 actually rose to 5.27 from 4.4 in the older cohort. So I want to make this clear. In the younger cohort, as time has gone on, the fertility rate of less religious Mormons has gone up, not down. Okay, so Mormons who considered themselves slightly less religious than half of Mormons. Oh, no, wait. So, sorry. What was the 4 group? It went up to 6. So 3 was average. So these are people who consider themselves slightly more religious than the average Mormon, but are not at the 5 or 6 level. So these are individuals who would have some Mormon friends, some non-Mormon friends, but would generally follow all of the rules and blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
Their fertility rate has gone up as overall Mormon fertility rate has been collapsing. Where it's been collapsing is in the ultra-religious cohort.
Doesn't that dovetail well with your argument around
deontological religious systems being the core failure?
No, pluralism being a driver of fertility. When you're more surrounded by groups that are different from you, you feel inspired to have more of your own group out of a feeling of pride.
That's likely a big thing here. So we've noted here that the more immigrants a country has, typically the higher the native group's fertility rate becomes. And the more animosity immigrant groups have with each other, or the more culturally distinct they are, the higher the fertility rate. I think this is a big thing, sort of subsidizing Israel's fertility rate.
Well, and it's also, you could look at it as a cultural pride thing. When you discover what it is that makes you special, it makes you proud to perpetuate that. If you don't see what's special about what you have because you're surrounded by it, you have less of a motivation to try to do your part to continue it.
This is actually something that he looked for. So to be in the 5 and 6 category, specifically in the 6 category, it meant that almost all of your friend group was Mormon at that point. So, and apparently this is a thing among devout Mormons. Like super devout Mormons just don't have many friends who aren't devout Mormons as well. And so it leads to this, you know, that would definitely, you're right there. I actually think that this is partly down to deontological relationship with religion versus non-deontological relationship with a religion. And in Mormonism, it's very easy to build a deontological relationship to a religion.
Yeah, but, to a fault. In fact, a lot of practicing Mormons that I've met focus only on the deontological element, not even really believing in the faith at all, just being like, I go through the motions because I like the community.
Yeah.
But they don't do it for a reason, you know?
Yeah, well, and this creates downstream negative effects, but we'll get to this at the end of the lecture. Not the lecture episode. I don't know. Whatever. Okay. Everything of mine is a lecture. I'm sorry, people. I used to teach classes, so that's why.
Well, you grew up on the great courses. Of course, you believe in lectures.
For people who don't know, there was this great company, Teach 1-2, where now you can get a subscription and just listen to their lectures.
Thought it was referred to as the teaching company. Now
it's called the teaching company, but I'm just saying teach12.com is their URL.
What it originally
was. They used to offer these absolutely amazing courses where they would find the best professors at like tons of different universities. I've heard that the quality of their courses has gone downhill recently, and I found the same thing. When I've re-engaged, I haven't been like as drawn in as I was by the old stuff.
It depends. There's a lot of variation. So they still have, it's now known as Wondrium. You can get an app and then you sort of buy a subscription to get access to their library of courses. And so you don't have to buy courses individually like you used to have to get big tapes of them. The problem is that now there is more variation. So for example, I love all of their courses by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, but you know, you can also get a lot of stuff by him for free, or you can just read his books. But those are really great. There are others that just kind of suck. So it depends.
For people who have read The Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion, I mentioned that you should divide your life into stages. Like that's the way my life was taught to me by my parents. Like between X age and X age, this is your focus. And I was taught up until a certain age, like my entire focus in life was to prepare myself, like make myself the best tool possible for changing the world. And that part of doing that was education. And I knew like in high school, I just wasn't getting a high enough quality education. So I would spend all of my free time listening to lectures. In my early jobs, when I had to do like boring sorts of just like lab work all day that wasn't cognitively engaging, I'd spend all day listening to lecture series. So, you know, these lecture series are typically like 24, 48 hours long in total. So it was an opportunity for me just to basically constantly be blasted with lectures to get a college level education.
Well, it's something your family also always did on long car rides. You would listen to them. I think it's a great thing for a family to do. Your mom still every morning while doing her yoga would listen to the great courses.
Yeah, my family built it as a normalized thing that you should always have lectures on. And I remember when I bought them as a young kid, they're really expensive. So, and this was in the 90s, you know.
I think they would cost in the 90s like $130. And that
it would cost $100 to $500 depending on the lecture series.
Yeah. I think these days, they almost charged what you would pay for an actual course at not even a community college, more than that.
But you could get them really cheap if you bought them on cassette, or not really cheap, but like in the
less expensive,
like $70 range sometimes. So I buy these big books of cassettes. If anybody remembers those old cassette books, this was long after anyone was using cassettes, and I just have a cassette player all the time. Also, because
you still have them, by the way,
did a very good job of holding my place in the lecture. And so I remember once I was jogging in gym class, and one of the teachers pulled me aside and they go, "Oh my God, was your family, because you're from Florida, right? Were they one of the ones hit by the hurricane? Like, is that why you always have all this cheap technology?" And I realized I could use this because I didn't like to change out of my dress shoes before running because it was such a pain in the ass. And I was like, oh yes. And then I didn't have to change out of my dress shoes anymore before running because
you were too poor.
I was too poor. Yeah.
Too poor. Oh no. Sorry, I derailed us. Let's go back. Let's get back.
Here. I have to go back to the thing. Religious rating 5 remained roughly stable, and ratings 1 to 3 plunged. Currently, for the 25 to 34 age cohort, the fertility rates are as follows: 1, 0.27, 2, 0.49, 3, 1.43, 4, 1.89, 5, 1.41, and 6, 1.23. So I want to note here, if you were like graphing this, the graph would pink at 4,
and then go down.
Start going down when you get to 5 and 6. And that 3 actually has a higher fertility rate than 5.
That's very interesting.
So it peaks on the early side. So you want to be in the 3 or 4 cohort, not in the 5 or 6 cohort. In terms of what I expect, and this is even among the very young kids, right? So we're still seeing this effect in the young kids. In terms of what I would expect these numbers to be eventually, these women are still having children, is the following. He goes, 1, 1.05, 2, 1.31, 3, 2.31, 4, 2.91, 5, 2.39, and 6, 2.25. The groups currently have a standard deviation of the following: 1 at 0.56, 2 at 0.69, 3 at 1.04, 4 at 1.13, 5 at 1.38, and 6 at 1.19. The implications of this are as follows. For whatever reason, devout LDS born after 1960 started having far fewer children. Lower religiosity Mormons born after 1988 will have fertility rates comparable to secular society at large. Moderately religious Mormons born since 1960 have on average the most kids, 4 being the highest rating, with 3 and 5 being virtually the same for younger Mormon women, but 5 being much higher for Gen X Mormon women. The theory is that those with, and note, he has a lot of beliefs about different, and I'm not actually going into all of his emails, because I just don't have enough information and there's not enough data to say that his observed theories are correct. But he thinks this mostly the difference in which religiosity group somebody falls into has a lot to do with what immigration wave their family came from.
Oh,
in terms of joining
interesting.
the Mormon church, with different parts of England and different motivators for, well, and Germany and stuff like that, and different motivators for the immigration, leading to them falling into different categories of sort of the Mormon faith. But just have that in your mind while I'm reading this next part. The theory is that those with Yankee/Puritan cultural background among Utah Mormons had collapsing fertility rates in the 1960-1990 period. Among the other high income and highly educated, they were able to maintain high fertility rates for those born 1960 to 1980, but afterwards this dropped precipitously. Some of these high income/education still have higher fertility, and this explains the higher standard deviation, 1.38 for this group. The group that is doing the best right now is likely part of what one would call the Trustee/clan based family structure, which there are an abundant amount of in Utah. Perhaps 10% of the total LDS population belongs to one. This group leans more working class, is extremely Trump coded, while the further away one is from 4, the less they are, and typically much more quote unquote red state in their culture, more culturally Western and vaguely Southern as opposed to waspy. And he showed me pictures of this group, and they do exist across the Mormon religiosity spectrum. And we'll talk about this more in the next video, because what was really interesting for me is they didn't set off my pod person instinct. And the other type of highly religious Mormon does set off my pod person instinct. And this was just really interesting to me. To me, when I looked at them, I was like, oh, they're culturally similar to me, or if not culturally similar, like they come off as like normal people to me and not like weird otherworldly waspy people, which was very interesting.
I don't think you've had enough pie. Why don't you have one more?
No, I'm fine.
I really think you should have more pie. Have more
Try
pie.
some pie.
Well, I just had a piece, you know, I mean...
Try the pie.
Try the pie. Try it.
Try the pie. Try the pie.
Try the pie.
Try the pie.
Tomorrow's episode is going to focus much more on the pod person instinct that some people have that causes them to be sort of instinctually freaked out when people show a degree of conformity to a central authority, and try to delineate exactly what signals elucidate this, as well as the cultural impact that the pod person instinct has had. But the type of Mormons that do not trigger this pod person instinct, culturally speaking, often have a lot of similarities to each other. Typically, these are the types of people who would wear a lot of camouflage or American flags, be a bit more tan, look a bit more like they drive a pickup truck, that sort of thing. And that is not all Mormons that fall into this category. It's actually quite different from mainstream Mormon culture. What this means long term is that Mormons genetically, based on reproductive fitness trends among the Utah Mormons, are becoming more Danish and somewhat more borderland/Celtic, and are becoming less Anglo. So to fill in a bit of what he's saying here from other parts of his theory that I didn't take time to fully read, and this is anecdotal evidence, not stuff that he picked up in the data, but he suspects that the Anglo-Mormons, who predominantly came from some parts of England and were some of the first of the Mormon settlers, fall much more into this deontological religious extremist category of Mormon, and that later Scotch-Irish groups who moved from the borderland regions into the Mormon territory, or from Denmark into Mormon territory, that they focus much more on this clan-based moral structure, and that has prevented them from becoming as ideologically extreme, but also given them more pride in their family and cultural heritage, i.e. they breed a lot, not because there's a set of rules telling them to breed a lot, but because they have pride in their family and Mormon identity. A great example of somebody like this in a different tradition is Peachy Keenan, who we had on the show recently. And a lot of people in the comments were saying things like, oh, you finally had a Catholic on the show and they don't know their theology. Specifically, we asked her a theological question and she was like, I don't know that one. And I think that this represents a perfect example of somebody who is motivated to breed and takes great pride in her Catholic identity, but isn't particularly worried about deontological perfectionism or theological perfectionism. And this mindset appears to be the mindset that is most successful in the current age. We actually, after the episode, Simone was having a conversation with one of our Catholic fans, who's another woman with a lot of kids, and she was saying the same thing in other words in one of her answers to Simone, where there was some theological point that came up, and she goes, I just don't really think about it much. And I think that this mindset, while it may be denigrated by the theological nerds, which are the type of people who watch this show, is actually the most robust mindset to resist fertility collapse. Gosh, on a second revision of this, now that I think about it, I've also noticed the same thing from the Jews that watch our podcast that we talk to. While we talk to a lot of like Orthodox Jews that watch this podcast, the ones that are theologically most competent and most interested in the theological questions, almost all are unmarried or have no kids. Whereas the ones that are more focused on Jewish identity and pride in Jewish identity do have lots of kids. And I think this helps elucidate one of the purposes behind sort of the Techno-Puritan project that we've been working on, which is to say it's very important from a intergenerational fertility perspective to identify what it means to be part of your culture, what your culture is about, and who you are as a people. And so even if you don't feel like you may have a history or one of the existing cultures that you want to glom onto, you can build your own. Just make sure it's distinct and communicated to your children, and something that you take pride in, and something that they might be able to choose to take pride in as well. I believe that Mormons age 65 plus were much more dysgenic and R-selected than those under 35, being much more K-selective. So first, what does K-selected versus R-selected mean? R-selected species are typically species that specialize in having tons of offspring but don't put a lot of parental involvement into them. Think of like the hundreds of turtles going down from the beach and some of them getting eaten by like crabs and seagulls that we talked about in the Peachy Keenan episode. But K-selected species is one that invests a huge amount of parental time in just one particular offspring, or well, never one particular offspring. Any species that did that would go extinct, but fewer offspring. The problem here being is that within a species, you don't get a bifurcation of K-selected or R-selected strategies, especially within humans. This is a between species comparison thing, and it doesn't really make sense to think of humans as either K-selected or R-selected strategies, because generally the humans who have tons of kids, or the cultural groups that have tons of kids, also put more effort into raising those kids than the humans who have a very few kids. In addition to that, and there's been a lot of studies done on this, the amount of effort you put into raising every individual kid doesn't lower the amount of effort you have for other kids. So if you look at like a graph of families based on how many children they have and the success likelihood in adulthood of those children, it's just not a huge correlation. You're not really hurting your other children's potential outcome by having more children. Also, one thing you may note in this graph is that children with one sibling actually do better than children with no siblings, and children with two siblings do even better than children with just one sibling. So the idea that, oh, I just have one kid and I'm going to focus tons of resources into raising that one kid, and then they'll be better off than if they had a sibling or two siblings, that's just factually untrue. Your first kid is helped by the first other kid you have. Then those two kids are helped by the next kid you have. And after that, any degree which they could be hurt is just really not that bad. So for example, if you're raising 4 kids, on average, those kids are going to have better outcomes than somebody who is raising just one kid. And finally, I'd note is that the few groups in history, the backwoods culture that we'll talk about more tomorrow and we talked about in yesterday's lecture, could be thought of as like plausibly R-selected in the way that they structured their clans, in that they offer almost no parental resources, which is one of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow. They're really just like, okay, have a ton of kids and you kids work together to figure it out, but I'm not going to help you in any way. And therefore, a lot of them died or didn't end up securing spouses and having kids of their own. And people can be like, well, that's a horrible way to do it. But if you don't do things that way, if you lean too far on case selectivity, then you don't get any intergenerational improvement because you don't have the fitter of the offspring being the ones who end up continuing the line, or the fitter variants of the culture being the ones that continue the line, with the assumption that every offspring is going to alter the culture to some extent. You basically are artificially propping up whichever random ones you do happen to have through the immense attention that you're focusing on them and money you're pouring into their education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which intergenerationally is going to have really negative effects for that culture. A culture that is not okay with its less fit offspring failing is a culture that is going to eventually die. However, ignoring all this KR stuff, if we're thinking about this type of Mormon that I was talking about earlier that does seem to be pretty high fertility in our current environment and doesn't set off my pod person detector.
Like a Mormon who codes this way to me, Kevin Dolan is a Mormon who codes this way to me, one of our Mormon friends, where to me, he feels much more like Western than Mormon like waspy. I guess I would say like the primary thing I would look for here is how sort of like preening do they come off as?
In his letters to me, he used the term trustee to describe this clan-based section of Mormon culture. And one of the really interesting things he pointed out about the trustee section of Mormon culture was that unlike the rest of Mormon culture, they're much more outdoorsy, more focused on fishing and hiking and skiing and stuff like that. And he noted how actually unusual stuff like skiing and outdoorsy stuff is for people on the Zubie side of Mormon culture, given how much of a paradise Utah is for these sorts of activities.
He says that this difference, and we'll go into it more in the next episode, is something called being a Zumi, I believe, a Zubie, which is a term that Mormons would know, but I wouldn't know. And I was reading, here's a quote about what Zubies are. You can tell a Zubie by appearance only, although there are a certain stereotyped look. Preppy sweater boys and plastic girls are often associated with Zubiehood. But yeah, continuing off of other trends and assumptions, this gene pool is now deselecting those with 110 IQs, but has become increasingly technophilic, with some small reactionary groups, often 6 in religiosity, being technophobic. This means that future Mormons, often coming from trustee/clan families in the 3 to 4 range, will be of IQ 90 types, but they may be higher educated types that if they do reproduce, some will be group 5 and 2, will have a higher amount of the IQ 130 types. I foresee similar conditions to exist for the next 30 to 40 years, and that group 5's fertility will stabilize around 2.3. Right now, I've noticed influencers are still having lots of kids, like at least 4, so there may be a real possibility of future genes in Utah will select even more for increased sociability, extroversion, performance skills, verbal IQ over spatial IQ, hand-eye coordination, and other related traits, and conventionally attractive looks that would support this. Bottom line, until the world radically revolutionized, those groups 3 and 4 will continue to have kids out of cultural pride. Honestly, there's almost as much local pride here as Texas, and a big part of that is having large families, and will be the most fertile group until there is either 1, radical changes in the outside global cultural environment, or 2, radical changes in the LDS church demanding higher fertility. I don't see either one of these happening mid-century. Now, this is really interesting, and he makes a really strong point here. Cultural pride in the current landscape, like the current social technological landscape, is a better motivator of high fertility than deontological religious rules. And what we are seeing is the Mormons in this ultra high religiosity category, they are likely motivated more by what the church is telling them to do and the church rules. And this does not appear to be good enough to overcome fertility collapse and the drivers of fertility collapse.
Yeah.
However, the Mormons in this, I'm an average Mormon, or I'm a bit more Mormon than the average Mormon, this group is primarily motivated by cultural pride.
Yeah.
And their cultural pride motivation is what is actually able to drive high fertility. And in fact, in the age of social media leads to an increase rather than a decrease in this cultural group's fertility.
Yeah, and that checks out with what I see in social media. The Mormons who are very active aren't the most devout Mormons by any stretch of the imagination. They kind of cheat or skirt on the rules a ton, but they clearly are generating pride, and they themselves have a lot of pride in their church and religion. So that is really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the gatekeepers are doing nothing but hurting their church, basically. The ones who are like, well, you're not a true Mormon unless, where, you know, I think that what we're seeing here is that those deontological Mormons, those preacher boy type Mormons, need to look to this other group to learn from them. And I think that this is something that, you know, we can also see in the United States, where you see things like the collapsing fertility rate of the Orthodox Christians and the Catholic Christians, who I think traditionally saw themselves as more of this preacher boy type character when they're ultra devout, than the more vulgar, you know, Protestant or Appalachian groups. And it's because these groups just have more pride in who they are, and they're not motivating fertility with a set of rules, but it's because they like existing and they like people like them existing. So let's keep that going, right? You know. So, and here I note one final point for those born after 1960 among this population group. I theorize that those who are in groups 1 and 6 have damaging / complicated / negative relationships with sexuality, especially forms of sexuality that are pronatal. And those who are in groups 3 and 4 are the opposite, with 2s and 5s being in between. And I note here, yeah, I definitely see this, is there's this new like group of Mormons who are becoming more sexually comfortable, and we'll do an episode on the Mormon swinger phenomenon, because apparently like swinger culture has gotten really big among Mormons because they get married so young.
It's just these moms of mom talk. Yeah.
But I've heard, no. I've heard from other Mormons online, they're like, oh yeah, like you go to X friend's house and you'll see signs that it's been happening. Like, but it's a really weird sort of swinger culture because they believe the only way to do it without cheating is to watch them sleeping with somebody. Like if the husband or wife is in the room watching you.
Well, my understanding is that the swinging is anything but actual PIV intercourse.
Yes, I think it's usually like oral and hand jobs.
Yeah.
Like
so
that.
It's, I think also the Mormon religion is kind of, it's one of those loopholes where like, if you're not going to be super persnickety about things, the whole, you know, sex before marriage thing, you know, it doesn't count if it's oral. That's not sex. And so that's pretty pervasive, etc. You know, things like that. So I could see that as not counting as sex outside of marriage because it's not technically sex. But anyway.
Well, and I know there's some Mormons here being like, oh no, those Mormons are the worst. And I'm like, those Mormons represent the hope for your religion. Okay?
And that's what's really surprising me about this message, that normally you think it's, and we've even kind of shared this message that it's the religious extremists that are going to, you know, carry forward their religious legacies and their people, and they're going to inherit the future of those groups. And yet here, it's essentially the moderates that represent the future of the LDS church, which is the last thing I was going to expect you to say, but it makes so much sense. And I should have thought, well, of course.
Yeah. Now, I've been doing more research, and it appears that the level of trustee/clanness may correlate more strongly than even the religious group rating. What I've realized is that for whatever reason, trustee/clan Mormon families concentrate on level 4, 1 to 6 religiosity group. Now, here we need to take a stop, because remember I said at the end of yesterday's episode, for anyone who hasn't watched that, you might want to watch it in preparation for tomorrow's episode, because these 3 episodes are sort of all building to the conclusion that while I think that these things matter, like the pure vitalism of a group matters, which can be measured in terms of murder rates, that's what we talked about yesterday, or going for a clan-based structure versus a deontological structure, like a group pride versus following a set of rules, matters in terms of fertility rate. I actually think the key to all of this is his second observation, which he goes into a lot more data about, but unfortunately comes from a lot of personal observations of family members and stuff like that. So I can't go too deep into all of that. But that within the Mormon culture, the people who have clan-based moral frameworks appear to be able to maintain really high fertility rates. And the people who don't have clan-based moral frameworks, the people who have communalist-based moral frameworks, are the ones whose fertility is collapsing. And it makes perfect sense that the communalists would cluster at the edge of the 5s and 6s in terms of being the most Mormons, and the clanners would concentrate in the 3s and 4s. So to understand what I mean by the difference between a clan-based moral system and a communalist-based moral system, and we're contrasting these with individualist-based moral systems, because people often make this mistake. They're like, you're either an individualist or you're a communalist. It's like, no, there's actually 3 moral systems: clan-based, individualist, and communalist. So if I ask a clan-based moral system person, like, who are you, right? Their first thought is, I am a member of my clan. So if I was going to explain this, and we'll go into this a lot more tomorrow, if somebody said, hey, Malcolm, like when I was growing up, how were morals taught to me? I was never taught things in terms of like moral absolutism, like this is a good or a bad thing to do. It was, you are a Collins, and this is what is expected of Collinses. Collinses have, and it was taught to me as if Collinses have a stricter and higher moral standard expected of them than the general population, and that the general population is just basically degenerates and you shouldn't expect anything of them. Generally, if somebody is in one of these clan-based moral systems, the fear is falling into the communalist-based moral system. So to explain what I mean by that, growing up, I was taught, well, you're a Collins, and these are the things expected of Collinses, and I would, see all of my wider family achieving these things, and my fear was, if I didn't achieve those things, well, then I'm not a Collins anymore. I'm just if I was a Mormon, I'm just a regular Mormon now. Now, there are 2 ways that you can, if you're a Mormon, teach moral systems to people, right? You could be the communalist and say, you are a Mormon, and this is what Mormons do, okay? Or you could say, you are a Collins who happens to be a Mormon, like the Collinses are a type of Mormon, and this is what Collinses do. So why would this clan-based thing lead to a more centralized position on the religiosity scale? It's because if you primarily identify with Mormonism instead of your family tradition, then you're just going to follow everything the church says. Everything the church says is what you follow. So you're going to fall at the extreme end of the religious spectrum. But if you are first a Collins, well, where Collinses break Mormon rules or where you're allowed to break moral rules and where you should have stricter rules. And so that makes perfect sense. For example, if you look at a lot of these clan-based Mormons, they'll be a little looser on like how they wear their undergarments and stuff like that, where they'll hike it up a bit more. And it's like, okay, well, that's technically not being ultra religious, but if your cousins are doing it and they're still considered part of the family. And I should note one thing about clan-based systems that people who didn't grow up in clan-based systems might not know is they're really quick to throw someone out. So when I look at like my wider cousin group, and I'm like, I always compare myself to family members. Like that's where I'm judging myself. Like, am I doing a good job in life? How should I be approaching, what success is defined as? What basic ethical constraints am I dealing with? When one of them doesn't perform up to family standards, I just sort of stop using them as one of the measures of comparison that I have access to. And I suspect that's the way these Mormon clans work as well, which is what prevents them from dropping off as quickly. If somebody leaves the church or stops following tons of rules and they're clearly no longer acting according with the clan's like moral system, you stop using them as somebody to judge yourself off of. And so they don't end up pulling you down. And in tomorrow's video, we're going to get really into why clan-based systems are so super, super resistant to fertility collapse and why communalist systems, like Mormons, you can immediately see why communalist systems are so susceptible to fertility collapse because you are always going to be affected by outside culture if you are a communalist.
Yeah. Well, and so if your outside culture becomes infected or toxic, you're more likely. So essentially there's less quarantining. So if there is a cultural infection that is sterilizing, you will not be protected from it. Whereas if you're in a clan-based culture, you may survive it because you're isolated sufficiently.
Yeah. I think that there's a secondary thing here, which is genetic. And this is, again, as many people know, I think people make the mistake of assuming that human sociological profiles are clearly genetically correlated. Like we've seen this in the data over and over again. It's like 60%. But people make the mistake of assuming that genetically correlated means falling into ethnic buckets instead of falling into very recent selection events, i.e., immigration waves, stuff like that, which is actually where a lot more of the concentration happens. So to word this a different way, I think I remember from my old psychology classes, it was around a quarter of people experience some form of auditory hallucination. Now, Mormons regularly will ask God what they should do in specific circumstances. So speaking to God is a regular thing that most Mormons do. Now, if I am living by a Mormon community, whether I am, Black or Hispanic or anything like that, and I happen to be subject to auditory hallucinations, and a Mormon says, well, if you're not sure what religion you should be, why don't you just ask God? I am going to be dramatically more likely to convert to Mormonism if I have this genetic script for auditory hallucinations, which means that this can concentrate super, super fast in a population like Mormons or Quakers when other populations may not have it much at all. And if I am a Mormon who doesn't experience these auditory hallucinations and I keep trying to talk to God and he never responds, I might be much more likely to deconvert. And that's how you can get these genetic clusters occurring really, really quickly. But then this also would happen with something like a communalist mindset or a clan-based mindset. If a specific group of Mormons really leans into communalist-based ways of thinking, they are going to disproportionately convert people, whatever their ethnic or cultural background, that lean more communalist around them. However, having a genetic propensity for communalism can cause a really negative side effect, which we talked about earlier, which is once you deconvert, well, now what's your new communalist source of information? Is the urban monoculture. And that's why this would explain why the most extremely religious Mormons, when they deconvert, become the most extremely woke individuals. Whereas clan-based people, when they deconvert, they're still moderated by their clan. They might have deconverted, but they're still a Collins. They're still looking to the clan for a sort of core moral centering. Finally, I note here is that I suspect that people with a genetic predilection towards a communalist moral framework, even if they are like Mormon, i.e. they want to be as Mormon as possible, they are going to be subconsciously influenced by the urban monoculture, given how much it dominates our society, much more than somebody who has been genetically selected intergenerationally for a clan-based moral framework. And so I think if you have been for a few generations in a communalist culture versus a clan-based culture, the genetic correlates that you're going to be selecting for are going to be the ones that look to society around you to try to determine the social norms that you're setting for yourself. And these people who used to only be surrounded by Mormons, now in terms of the images that they're seeing and the media they're seeing, are just going to see more non-Mormons and be comfortable correlating themselves with those individuals. Also, they were motivating their moral behavior through what they saw in, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like deontological rule sets. And those deontological rule sets, they are no longer at play right now. And so, well, when I say they're no longer at play, they're no longer strong enough to overcome the urban monoculture. Or
they're no longer protective. I think what you're saying is they're no longer protective. And there were environments in which they were probably. And if they are not adapted in the face of new technology and globalization and other elements that render old rules ineffective, then they won't matter anymore.
And clan-based moral systems are primarily motivated by pride.
Yeah. Well, and I would say they're more adaptable in the end, because most clan-based systems, which I imagine you will discuss more later, they reward the successful family members who then dictate the future of the clan's culture. Meaning that people can adapt, and those who do adapt to changes and to technological progress are going to help the culture iterate, right?
Yeah, they adapt much faster. And think about it. Like, Within a clan-based moral system, and he was noting this in other emails to me, that they've gone way more technophilic than the deontological communalist Mormons, who are at the extremist end of their religion. These individuals have not become like all coders and everything like that, whereas the clan-based people have. And I think it's because they genuinely are motivated by wanting to be better than other people, like have their clan be better than other clans and other people and stuff like that, and pride in their individual clan. So if they see a societal arbitrage opportunity like engaging with technology, they're going to do it. Whereas the other community is just not going to do it as quickly. They're like, well, is this what our people have always done? Whereas a clan-based person will be like, well, my cousin, who I know is a devout Mormon, is currently working in crypto. Therefore, it's okay to work in crypto. My cousin, who's a devout Mormon, is currently working in AI tech. So I can go work in AI tech. Like now that's on the table because everyone in our family is talking about him with a lot of respect. With the deontological group, you're not going to get that adaptation as quickly. I wanted to add a comment from our Discord where somebody made a really good point in one of them, Yithie, who said, clan structures correlating with high fertility is a good point. Of the countries outside of Africa, the ones with the highest fertility today have the strongest clan structures, whether Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, or the Central Asian stan countries. The countries in Africa with the highest fertility are also those with the strongest clan structures, like Somalia, for example. It would also explain why Muslim countries with weaker or no clan structures like Iran have lower fertility. That being said, I think the strength of clan structure is heavily tied to urbanization, and the more urbanized a country gets, the weaker the clan grows. Most of the previously mentioned countries with strong clans are still very rural and poor. As they get richer and more urban, the clan structures might weaken. In East Asia, there used to be a stronger clan structure, with every family having a shrine dedicated to their ancestors, but they went into significant decline about a century ago with modernization/industrialization. Also, there are different types of clan systems, one where people mostly marry outside of their clan, and one where people mostly marry inside of their clan. The traditional East Asian model, which includes Mongols, would be to marry outside your clan. This is also how it was done in Scotland. Not sure if it would be the same in Appalachia, but I'd assume since they're descended from the Scotch-Irish. And yes, it was true. It's outside your family marriage tradition. In most clans in the Muslim world, on the other hand, it is more common to marry within your clan. Not sure if one would correlate more with high fertility than the other. It seems that marrying within your own clan does, but this could just be because the cultures that do this are poorer and more rural. Here, I wanted to note my response to this. My disagreement would be that East Asia was really a clan-based moral system. It has always been fairly communalist, with the cultural norms coming not from the family but from the central courts. Yes, superficially you worshipped your family, but you cared what outsiders thought an awful lot. What do you think, Octavian? What do you want in who you make a mommy for your kids?
Indy.
You want Indy? You want to marry Indy? That's your sister.
No,
Octavian.
you treat Indy like your little sister.
Obviously, we've never sat down with Octavian yet and explained that you don't marry your siblings, but I actually think this answer shows a very instinctual sort of clan identity that when he was trying to choose who is the best woman I know of around my age, he's not choosing like a fictional character from one of the shows he watches, but he's like, oh, my sister, that's the best a woman can be. And so I thought it was a very sweet answer, but one that also sort of illustrates that there might be a genetic component to this, because obviously we didn't teach him that. That would be a very bad thing if we had taught him that.
Octavian, can you tell our listeners that they should like and subscribe? Then do it. You're a silly goofus. I love you, buddy.
What are you doing? Do you think the audience likes to look at you spin? You got to say things. They only like it when you say it. You're not saying like and subscribe. You're not saying like and subscribe. You're not saying like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Here, I'll leave him with you while I go get the other kids.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a favor. Can you tell Stacey to get the crowd for me?
Okay, we'll do. Here. Anyway, I absolutely love you, Simone. You are amazing. We got these 2 episodes done pretty quickly, so we can start on the next one if you want, or we can do dinner early.
If I need more sleep, let's do dinner
Let's
early.
do dinner early and put the kids. You're actually going to put them to bed early. You're not going to be in.
Well, yeah, if I have an earlier start time and they're eating when they get home instead of, after I'm done prepping.
By the way, one thing I'd love it if you could begin taking out for me is sawing some of those kebabs.
Yeah, we actually, I'll walk you through what we have in the deep freezer because I found some artisanal Amish meats.
What types?
Yeah, I will show you.
I
Gotta enjoy. They're high quality. They're what an esteemed guest had accidentally left behind and said was all ours because he wasn't going to come back and get them. So.
Oh, what are they?
I will show you. You will have to see. I honestly,
the audience is going to want to know. We're recording right now.
I think some of it's Amish chicken because that's what you get in restaurants. I think some of it might be some sausage, and then I think there are 2 salmon patties, if memory serves. But I actually didn't look that closely because it hurts my hands to hold them when they're out of the bottom of the freezer like that.
Okay,
so I just toss them in the basket.
Kebabs, okay, those things don't sound that appealing to me. I don't really like chicken or salmon.
All right.
And for tonight, I guess we're doing pasta again, right?
You don't have to. You can do. I think the kebabs are probably ready to go out of the.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
do you want to do kebabs tonight?
Do a kebab with like mixed vegetables or potatoes. Let's do the potatoes and kebabs.
There's only a tiny bit of potatoes left. So how about sauteed vegetables and potatoes and kebabs? Or do you want your street corn, your Mexican street corn?
Oh,
Mexican street corn, vegetables, and kebabs.
Let's do potatoes, street corn, and kebabs.
Oh, all of them. Okay.
Take out the mixed vegetables. Just do the potatoes and the corn to finish off the potatoes.
So you just want carbs and okay, yeah. Okay.
Oh no, okay. Veggies.
You get a veggie, you get a carb, and you get a protein. That's
veggies, potato, and kebabs. Let's kill the potatoes to get something down in the fridge.
Okay. I love you.
I love you. I'm sorry I'd be annoying.
You're never annoying. You're perfect.
You're perfect.
Ow. Okay. Oh. No. No, I can't. Why can't I move you? You're not moving. There. Oh, thank you. Oh, gosh. Hold on.
I saw a really funny Babylon Bee article.
Okay.
Rashid Tlaib uninjured after her pager mysteriously explodes.
Oh no.
That was I like do we need to do an episode on that event? Because that was so cool that they pulled that off.
Incredible spy movie stuff. I feel like maybe we need more information first, but what an incredible feat of
I might, after like all the information has come out, do one of these things where I try to create like the most comprehensive source on a particular subject.
That would be great because I want to watch that. I want to know everything about this.
Because that was wow. I cannot believe I pulled that off. All right.
Yeah.
I'll get started.
I guess you would have to own the largest pager manufacturer in the Middle East, like, or several theoretically.
No, so it appears I don't want to explain it because I actually read into this in detail already.
Okay, then no spoilers.
Idea of how it was pulled off.